My name is Tim Vetter, and I am a manufacturing equipment engineer. I use data to determine the production throughput, part quality, and the general overall health of equipment all the time. At work, all decisions are data-driven. If my source data is not accurate, we could be wasting millions of dollars per hour. The data has to be good. What is the value of timely, accurate election data? What is the value of your vote? And what is the value of your freedom? I want to be clear that I stand alongside all the dedicated city and jurisdiction clerks who conducted free and fair elections and continue to work hard for election integrity. The source data I'm presenting is damning. It's beyond comprehension. It's clear evidence of statewide data manipulation from the top down, not from the bottom up. This presentation is the joint effort of dedicated and very talented patriots from the Election Integrity Force. I am honored to work alongside many of those patriots with elected law enforcement and many others who are standing for freedom with our elections. It shows with our elections, the data that we're analyzing, we have irrefutable data manipulation, and it's still happening to this day. This data, to be very clear, comes from the Secretary of State office. We get it by way of FOIA, and for the gentleman who asked the question, can I access the data? The answer is yes. If you FOIA, I have the data on my computer at home, so I can do statewide data searches on my local computer. And as Braden very eloquently pointed out, because we have so many data timestamps, we can do analysis that most people can't, not even the local clerks, because the local clerks only have access to the live data. So the data is changing on a daily basis. Election integrity should not be a partisan issue. It's an American issue that we should all embrace and defend, no matter who wins the election. Our state legislature has not properly investigated the 2020 election. Most, not all, of them have turned a blind eye. Why did it take True the Vote, Election Integrity Force, our sheriffs, and many other organizations to find all that data manipulation that we've discovered so far? What data manipulation is yet to be found with a proper investigation by our elected leaders? These are the leaders who take an oath of office to serve the American people. They have, some, not all, are delinquent in protecting our most sacred freedom. We honor those that are fighting for our election integrity, like Sheriff Darley. There's many others that we're working with. I commend them for their brave efforts. Starting off with this quote. This quote here is almost 1 month old, but our Secretary of State is still saying, with Jocelyn Benson as the Chief Election Officer, her responsibility is to ensure our elections are accessible, safe, secure, and that the results are an accurate reflection of the will of the people. That's a true statement, but you have to be able to back it up with the data. Now, after I present this data to you tonight, she should be retracting these statements. Every file that we get has what's called chain of custody. So before anyone is going to say, who's manipulating the data that you're looking at? Well, it's very important to know that when we get a file from the Secretary of State, it's going to be a history file and it's going to be a voter file. Voter files are the 8 million records. The history file is what we're going to talk about tonight. You don't hear much about that. I'm going to tell you all about it. The key thing you want to see is when you have a chain of custody, your source data is going to reflect the proper date that was compiled from the source. I'm pretty excited about this talk. And I'm so glad you guys came here this evening, because this information, most of what I'm going to share with you, has just come out about a month ago. It went public right after the Roe v. Wade decision. So not many people know about this. So we're excited to share this information with you right now. You can go to the EIF website, electionintegrityforce.com, and I'm going to focus on report number 5. But you're going to see that we have several reports that we have on file so far. Election crime is a felony. Basically, that's all I'm really pointing out here. If you manipulate the data, remove the data, modify, falsify, it's a felony, punishable. So I'm going to talk first about the major fix number 1 for transparency. When you go to the Secretary of State site, you can get the numbers right off the website. Unfortunately, the problem with this data is when we try to get our FOIA information, we can only get the information on the first day of each month. Well, when do they hold the elections? Right after the first of the month. So they have all this time to clean up their data before we can get the next data set on December 1st. And the only way that we can really get what we want is we have to go through our elected officials or hopefully through our law to subpoena the information on the timing that we want it. So the data has not been cleaned up or manipulated. And I'll explain what's going on. The other thing, the city of Detroit is exempt from reporting precinct. Now they report by precinct on primaries, but during the general elections, they're not required to do it, so why do it? What they end up doing, I'll show it to you this way, the law says you are required to present all your data by precinct. Well, except for this loophole. And the loophole says you can, if you have more than 250 jurisdictions, you can report by counting board. Everyone hear about all those issues with counting boards with the city of Detroit? That's when they lump together all these different precincts, and every major election, they move them around. So you never know which precincts are with which county board. This information is not publicly available. That's not transparency, in my opinion. Report number 3, I'll just tell you real quick what that one's about. When we got our first QVF, dated December 1st, there were 131 precincts that had 0 missing votes. Now let me be clear about something. Is that an indication of the local clerk having an issue? No. What that means is that information had to be scrubbed from the source, from the very top, because that's where we got our data. So somewhere, all the local clerks uploaded the data, but when you go to get the data, it didn't end up in the FOIA request. As a matter of fact, the type of pattern we saw, 57 counties were affected, 131 precincts. We have every voter that we know is missing. We have every information about where all these precincts are that had 0 in-person votes. And we're going to talk a little bit also about the importance of the local clerk keeping their election information, because that's what we need from you to prove that we voted in person. We need to be able to go to our local clerk to get the data to prove how we voted and when, and if we voted absentee or in person. I'll tell you a little bit later why that's so important. Braden talked about missing 4 million votes. This is the voter history right here. Remember I said it comes in 2 files. This is your registration file. Typically there's about 8 million people registered. That number's way too high. This file here is the history file. So when you vote, your history gets recorded in a separate file, so it can record where you voted and which elections you voted in. This is real important. Our talk tonight is focused on this. This is where all the shenanigans are happening. Yeah, there's shenanigans here too, but we're going to talk about this area. I need you to put on your thinking cap. This gets a little bit more advanced. When I talked about registration files, That's one thing. When I talk about the history files, there are certain categories that you put your information in. I have my voter ID number, I have my county name, I have my jurisdiction, I have the election date that I voted, and whether I voted in person or absentee. We don't identify a precinct. Now, not only are we not giving all the detail here, but if I move, what happens to the history, these are all the QVF dates. Back in 2019, this individual lived in Calhoun County. But guess what? When I move from Calhoun County to Berry County, guess what happens? All my history everywhere is reflected with my current location. So I have the information of where I voted now gets overwritten. Why is that an issue? Because you can't go back into the history files and figure out who voted where. If people move, they scrub the old information. We're going to talk more about scrubbing, but this is one of the types of scrubbing, is they manipulate the data by changing the history. One thing I want to stress is in the data world, no data is better than wrong data. Remember that. If you're looking at data and it's telling you to go there and you really should be going there, that's a problem. It's better to have no data so you're not at least being sent in the wrong direction. Braden brought up Christina Caramo. She is our poster child. We sat with her for 3.5 hours just about 4 days ago. We talked to her a lot about this, and there's going to be some exciting things coming from that discussion here. This whole area of scrubbed data, where her voting history is missing for almost a year, we call this scrub voting history because on all of these data sets that we got from the Secretary of State, she has no history. She has a little bit of history here, but this history is wiped out. This right here, we're going to give it a name. We're calling that delayed voting history. What does that mean? Delayed voting history, she voted on the election day, right? But her vote did not show up in the QVF until February of 2022, a year and 4 months later. What's going on? I'm going to tell you what's going on. How many voter histories have been scrubbed? 930 voters, over 930,000 voters have had their history files scrubbed. That 4 million number is tied to this. So with that many voters, you got about 4.5 votes on average per person. That's how you get to 4 million. Voters, voter records, all scrubbed. We have the names, the addresses, we have all the data. We can break it down into jurisdictions. We know exactly where all these people are that are missing their history, and it is statewide. So let's talk about delayed voter history. Delayed voter history, as we're looking through the different date stamps, we would anticipate shortly after the election that all the voters would be in there. There would be 0 missing votes, and that after the election, there would be no late votes added to the QVF. It should be in there, and then as people either move, provide to the clerk in writing, take me out of the QVF, because you can say, take me out, or you die. Those are the 3 ways you can get out of the QVF. So votes removed, we would anticipate that these numbers would be about 8,000 per month, but we would expect no votes to be added. What you're seeing here is what Braden mentioned before. 104,000 are missing just 4 weeks after the election. So where are all those votes? We're pretty confident that the local clerks uploaded them. Why were they not in the FOIA just 4 weeks after the election? By law, they should have been there within 7 days. And then there's a 15-day rule that says that the Secretary of State, if there's any data missing, she's responsible for knocking on the doors of those that are missing to get them in there. So they're all supposed to be in there, folks. Why are they missing? We don't know. Until we can investigate this, we don't know. 8 weeks after the election, we get about 900 more. So if you take the difference between 104 and 103, we now have 900 less missing votes. But guess what? That's not really accurate. Just because there's a difference between these two numbers of 900, I'm going to talk about how we come to over 21,000 removed and 22,500 added. So when I say a 915 difference, that's not new votes found. What you have to look at between the two QVFs is you have to say, how many of these votes between the December QVF to the January QVF, how many of these are common IDs and common votes? When you find that, and if you know what, put your thinking cap on. When you know how many are common, you know how many votes are in the December QVF that are not here. If the votes have been removed, it's because these votes were here, but they're not here. And if the votes are in the January QVF, but they weren't in the December, they were votes added. And by the way, you should not see votes added in January. Between January to April, those are the next two date stamps. You got your common votes. Of course, you have a 35,000 increase. You're thinking, holy cow, there's 35,000 new votes. No, that's not quite accurate. You have to look at how many were removed. There's actually almost 49,000 added in April, 6 months after the election. It gets better, but there's more, as Janice likes to say. So we're going down as recent. We're going to get the June QVF here soon. We're going to hopefully find more. We're on a mission to find every vote from the 2020 election as late as they get added. But even as late as May of 2022, there were over 1,000 votes added. That's amazing, by the way. So we come up with 97,000 total so far. And with each month, it gets larger. But guess what? As data people, we're bouncing these numbers around and we say to ourselves, we got votes added and votes removed. How many in all of these adding and removes, how many of these have common voter IDs? So we wrote a query and we figured that out. But it's not on this slide. But basically, this slide is just breaking down, stratifying from high to low, all these delayed votes. I don't see Barry in here. There are some in Barry, just so you know. I got a special tab for you. And I have a special tab for Jackson, too. We'll get to that. Here's my Jackson tab. So how many were delayed? So far, 576. Not too bad, but keep in mind, those should have been in the original QVF. So I break them down by jurisdiction, but you also know that each one of these numbers has a voter ID, a name, an address. Wouldn't you like to know whether your vote counted from the get-go? Wouldn't you like to know if your vote was added a year and a half later? Did my vote really count? That's what we want to find out. How many duplicates? 17,700 almost. So what does that mean? That means when you're looking at these removed and adds, you were in the QVF, then you were removed, and then you were added again. Why were you removed in the first place? Anyone want to take a shot of why that would happen? Why would you be removed from the QVF only to be added back? Actually, we can't take questions. I'm sorry. We're going to take questions right after the presentation. I know the answer to that. The only way that can happen is if you have dual databases and they're out of sync. Did we talk about triplicates? So here we go. We're in, we're out, we're in. This is like you put your left hand in. That's my joke for the day, I'm sorry. All right, so how many were in Jackson? Jackson has their share of duplicates as well. So do we look at the local clerks to say this type of data manipulation is happening? Absolutely not. This is happening from the top down. We need to know and understand what's going on. This is clear evidence of data manipulation happening from the top, with the source data coming from the Secretary of State's office. I'm not saying that Jocelyn Benson is the one removing and adding. I'm saying someone is manipulating the data, and we need to get to the bottom of who's doing that. So when you take out all the common voter IDs, remember this number, 97,000? Now we're down to just under 80,000. We're still missing 24,000 people that voted in the November 2020 election. We don't have enough unique IDs to come up with that total number. I got more. We're going to now talk a little bit about vote switching. This is a whole new concept. When we did our door-to-door canvassing, we go up to a door, we knock on it. We already have the information about how many people voted from this house and how they voted. So we know we spend a lot of time, as you heard Braden mention and Ann, a lot of us did a lot of canvassing. So when we go to a door and we say, well, we're here to double check the registrations. We just want to confirm how many registrants are here. We show 5 people here. They all voted in person or absentee, one way or the other. Usually what the person will say is they'll find out, well, it's just my husband and my wife that live here, and we voted in person. But the QVF says you voted absentee. Think 2,000 mules and how many ballots, absentee ballots, were harvested and stuffed in the ballot box. Where did all those ballots go? They went to your house, to your UPS store, to your vacant lot, to your dorm. There's many places to stuff ballots. Here's a husband and wife team down in Troy. They, as you can see here, in-person voting. How many are there? 24 times this person voted in 10 years, and he knows how to vote in person. But look, it's absentee for the November election. There's his wife. No, the other was the wife. This is the husband. Both of them voted together. Both of them had their votes switched. I'm just going to keep going down through this list. These are all examples that we confirmed. We talked to them in person. They know how to vote in person, but yet, and here's a Berry County. I threw that one in for you. Now here we go with Jackson County. We got Township, or Rives. We got Columbia Township, Sandstone Township, Jackson City. These are all people that vote. They know how to vote in person, but yet on the election day, these are individuals that we confirmed. They don't vote absentee. They won't vote absentee. They vote in person. How many do we have like that? How many show that same pattern? We wrote a query. Query looks like to test everyone on how to do SQL programming. Are you ready? Almost 844,000 voters. Now, keep in mind, I'm aware that are COVID related. There are some people that voted in person all their life, but because of COVID, they chose not to vote in person. 844,000 follow that same pattern. So the question becomes, how many of these people voted in person? Because their voting history record says absentee for the November election. The only way we can get that information, go to your local clerk, just ask for them to confirm that you did vote in person. And they'll either tell you, your QVF displays whether you voted absentee or in person. Only you know how you voted. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about vote switching. This is a different type of vote switching. This is this is just taking the history files, writing a query, and saying, tell me any individual that has voted either in person or absentee, and then their vote switched during the history files. Why does that happen? Remember I mentioned dual databases and how they can get out of sync? That's exactly what's happening. As a matter of fact, this is a public service announcement for Darren Caldwell. He not only got out of sync, but he got an in-person and an absentee vote in the same QVF. So he keeps showing up twice, going back and forth. So the query kind of puts this kind of pattern to him. But we know Darren did not vote twice. We know he did not do this. This is a clear, what I would like to say to Darren is go to see your local clerk and have your voting history cleaned up. Your clerk should be able to clean this up where your history is not displayed that way. Here's your voter ID. Braden brought up a whole bunch of these. I'm going to just give you one example. Here's an example of the United States Postal Office. There are 21 brand new absentee votes. And as you notice here, they disguise this address, 22332 Farmington Road. Sometimes they say apartment number, unit number. These are not addresses where you live. So this is one of the ways that they stuffed ballots. They ended up at this location and many, many other locations. So if you are holding the most transparent and honest election, you'd be proud to share and tell everyone, here's how we accomplished holding the best election ever. Wouldn't you imagine? But if you did not do that, you would be obstructing any access to kind of figure things out or to conduct any investigations. That is what's going on. Our elected leaders, I've spent time with Senator Ed McBroom, and Senator Ed McBroom, I want to say hi to you. You failed us in being able to get us in the public eye to hold a public hearing so we can get this information out. The only way we can get this information out is by having these little town halls. So I want to thank you for coming here. Make sure you share this information with everyone you know, because this is how we're getting the information out to the general public. We're not getting it out through our elected representatives, I can tell you that. And we're not getting our elected leaders at the Secretary of State to address any of this. Gretchen Whitmer said her campaign promise was, I'm going to fix the damn roads. I wish I could hear them say, I want to fix the damn elections, right? I'm going to just wrap things up here. Eric, the Electronic Registration Information Center, we touched on it already. What ended up happening with Eric, it caused it basically did the opposite of what it was planned to do. So what Sheriff Darleaf just pointed out, why is 31 such an important number? And that's because if Eric can take control of our elections, which I personally, I can't prove it, but I believe with every fiber in my heart that Eric is manipulating the data. They're the ones that are taking the data from the QVF, manipulating it on the side. They're the ones creating the chaos within the QVF that I've just showed here tonight. So how are we going to get to the bottom of this? We got to get an investigation, and we have to get Eric out of the way. One person that plans to do that is Christina Caramo, and our elected clerks, they know this. They're responsible for the quality of the data. They're responsible for getting our voting rolls cleaned up. We already showed this slide with Eric coming on board, registration spiked. So what this slide is saying, how many, this was one of the services from the Election Integrity Force. How many issues did we find with the QVF that have been recently added from Eric, right? They've been putting in so many false registrations dead people, people that don't live at addresses anymore. As you can see here, these are national numbers, and I got a slide for Jackson too, by the way. 460,000 we need to have cleaned up. Statewide, 15,468. You guys are going to be very busy. Jackson cleanup, you can't see it, 7,000 total, about 160 people that, these last two columns, people who voted from a house, but they live somewhere else. They don't live at that address, but they voted from there. So these are, these last two for law enforcement to follow up. And I'll just wrap things up by just saying thank you. We all love this country, and we honor those who serve the country with integrity. We need a lot more patriots. We need a lot more people like you to do the right thing, go after those who are destroying our Constitution and destroying our election and destroying our sacred country.